I'm the Robert Francis Ings, Director of the Lemon Project, A Journey of Reconciliation. It is my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to the um, four centuries of Black women in America, freedom, activism, and justice for all. Before we begin, I'd like to share the following statements with you. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of our lands our campus is on today. The Cheronaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. Also, the Lemon Project stands with the rest of William and Mary in solidarity with our Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian colleagues and students to say that anti-Asian hate is unacceptable and has no place at William and Mary. It is now my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Molly Shilo, the Lemon Project American Studies Graduate Assistant. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jody. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for attending today's panel on the Lemon Project's Branch Out trip. So Branch Out's mission is to engage students in alternative breaks that help them build community and become active and engaged individuals dedicated to social justice. The trip, in collaboration with the Lemon Project, focuses on the history of racism and education at the college. In today's roundtable discussion, Branch Out participants will be describing their experiences from their virtual trip in January, reflecting on what they learned through workshops, lectures, and their own research, and discussing the social media campaigns they produced, highlighting African American women throughout the centuries. Before I turn over to let the panelists introduce themselves, I would just like to say if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat and we will have time to address them. This panel will be a little different from the ones so far since we have all of these different participants. It's going to be a guided discussion. I have questions to ask them, and through that we'll get to know some of their experiences and what they've learned. So panelists, if you wouldn't mind going around and introducing yourself. Meg, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Meg Jones. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior, and I was one of the site leaders for this trip. And I am studying sociology and government. And in Branch Out, we like to popcorn to people. So I will popcorn it over to Taylor to introduce herself next.
Hi, I'm Taylor Sheckleton. I use she, her pronouns, and I was the other site leader for this Branch Out trip. And I'm a chemistry major and a German studies minor. And I will popcorn to Taylor.
Hi, my name is Taylor Fisher. I'm a freshman. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a history major. I will popcorn to Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria. I am a senior at William & Mary, and I'm a neuroscience major and French minor, and I use she, her pronouns. And I will popcorn to Toby.
Hello, everyone. My name is Toby. I'm a junior. I use she, her pronouns, and my major is Africana Studies and Public Health. I'm going to go ahead and popcorn to Zoe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Mollenkop. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at the college, a neuroscience major and a biochemistry minor. And I will popcorn it over to Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin, and I'm a sophomore at the college. I'm a neuroscience major as well, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you all so much. So before we begin, as Meg and Taylor mentioned, they were the site leaders for this year's trip. I was hoping the two of you could give our audience a little bit more background on what Branch Out is from a leader perspective.
Taylor, do you want to start, or do you want me to? Okay.
You go
I'll go
first.
ahead. So Branch Out, like Molly had mentioned, is an approach to social justice that goes through typically like a trip format, but is highly centered around education, around the issue, and values like mutually beneficial partnerships and sustainability, and focusing on diversity and inclusion throughout our entire process of focusing on the social justice issue, as well as following up with our project to make sure it's sustainable with this, which is kind of our reorientation or a project following the project, just to make sure everything, like I said, is sustainable. But so that's the format of the trip. Taylor, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about what we were doing exactly here, but.
Yeah, so we partnered with the Lemon Project for this trip, obviously. And a big thing we focus on in Branch Out is education. So before the trip, we had a few meetings educating the participants on things regarding the Lemon Project and history of African Americans at William and Mary. And so that's a really important part because we want to come into our service being knowledgeable and not expecting our community partner to educate us because we are very capable of doing that ourselves. So that's a really big part of Branch Out. And then throughout the trip, every night we would have reflection sessions. So going over what we talked about that day and what we learned and how we can grow using that newfound information.
Yeah, and I do want to mention that typically our trips are in person. So we would be actually going to the site and spending time with a community partner and then returning to William and Mary and continuing the work on campus. But due to COVID and these unforeseen circumstances, we have adjusted to doing things virtually. And so that was the format of our trip, was a weekend over Zoom. So.
Thank you both. So now anyone feel free to answer. Taylor, you touched on this a little bit, but part of Branch Out means doing work before the actual trip. What sort of activities or research or educational stuff did you all do before your trip, the virtual Zoom weekend?
I can speak to that a little bit. So we did, like Taylor said, we did a lot of different forms of research ahead of time. One of the parts of the research that really stuck out to me, we all read a chapter of a book called A Black Women's History of the United States, which was incredibly informative. I think we all, or at least myself, I certainly learned so much from it. And then on the first day of the break, we kind of shared what we had gathered. And that book in particular was a really great introduction into intersectionalism and kind of the ways that multiple forms of identity interact with one another, and how that plays into the experience of Black women in particular in the United States.
Yeah, and a key addition to focusing, we talked a lot about intersectionality during we have pre-trip meetings that are mainly educational, but also skill-based prior to the trips. And so intersectionality and the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw into intersectionality were really big parts of what we focused on and talked about, especially when entering into a space of discussion about Black women and difficulties facing Black women. But we also, since our work was mainly on social media and social media campaigns, we also focused a little bit on social activism through these mediums and ways in which campaigns can be effective. So we had a little bit of a demo and a few YouTube videos that we talked a little bit about just to make sure that we were prepared on that end.
So you mentioned the social media campaigns, which I want to spend a good chunk of time talking about. So you all developed social media campaigns of important Black women throughout the centuries. What can you tell us about these projects? Which women did you highlight? How did you decide? Which women did you consider? And if everyone wants to sort of speak to maybe one or two of the projects that they devised.
I can go first on this one. So I was partnered with Toby, and we were given contemporary women to look at. And so we were given a list of a few different women to choose from, Black women, influential. And so we went through, and Toby actually picked someone who was very relevant to William and Mary, and she can speak on that a little bit if she would like to. But I chose Alicia Garza, who is a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I thought that was just very relevant given this past year and all that's been going on. And so I will pull up my post and share my screen 1 second so everyone can see it. Okay. So I wanted to just highlight Alicia Garza and included a quote by her that I thought was very relevant. And then some of her most important actions she's done. And then finally, her podcast and her book that I thought would be really great if people wanted to look more into that. So that was my post for her, and that got posted on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook if you would like to look more at that.
Yeah, so like Taylor discussed, we worked on contemporary women, and the person that I chose to work on was Trudy Harris, who was the first African American to be a tenured professor at William and Mary. And I thought that was pretty interesting because I never really knew who she was, and I didn't know who the first tenured professor, the first African American tenured professor was. So it was really cool getting to know her and like the work that she's done. I can also share my screen as well and share what I posted on social media. So these are a couple of the slides that I created with all the information that I did. And it was really important for us to like kind of incorporate like information that was important, but also concise for people to learn as much as they can. So that was definitely a part that we worked on that was really essential to creating like information that was like palatable for everybody to understand.
So I was with Debbie Chen, who's not here today, but we did Women in the Civil Rights Movement. She did Mamie Till Mosley, who is the mother of Emmett Till, and did a really good post for that. And I did Polly Moray, and I can share my post. And I basically chose her because I never heard of her before, and she was involved in so many different interesting movements that I was like very amazed at the amount of impact that she had on American history, and the fact that I'd never heard of her before. Her law paper was included in Brown v. Board. She made lots of like important speeches about intersectionality, she was a part of the founding of the National Organization for Women, just all sorts of amazing things that she did. So I was very honored to research her.
I can go next. So my partner is on here either. Her name is Maria Gard. And so we had the civil rights movement women. And so we chose two people that people might have heard of, Madam C.J. Walker and Ma Rainey. Both of them actually have a Netflix show. And so that's kind of the reason why we chose those two women, was because we wanted to give another chance for like other people to learn more. So we kind of wanted to give them a sneak peek and then just kind of bring it all home and they could watch a movie about it. And so I can share my screen really quick and show one of the posts. And so this is the one that I did, Madam C.J. Walker. And so I just wanted to kind of give a little snippet about who she was and what she did, and then kind of, have other people reach out and kind of use Netflix to our advantage here. And so did Rhea as well in her posts. But that's what we did.
I can go next. I was lucky enough to be paired with Meg, and we were assigned to work on the pre and early North American and enslaved women. I chose to share about a woman named Molly, who is actually an enslaved woman mentioned in the Bruton and Middlesex Parish baptism registry. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. But I was really interested in, sorry, my share screen coming up. Looking at a woman who was part of William and Mary's history, since we were talking about the Lemon Project and the legacy of our treatment of African Americans. And I'll just leave it on the first slide here because this quote was really poignant to me. It's from the Lemon Project report. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. It was this one, my first slide of my post. Of the remaining records, many only mention Black people in passing, and when they are mentioned, the comments shed more light on the white people involved than on the humanity of African Americans. And I thought that really spoke to something that we focused a lot about talking about with what is the history, but also who shapes the history and what does that tell us about past values.
Yeah, so I can share then my side of the project. So I chose to focus on an individual who was given the name Angela in baptismal records or in the census that was taken at the time, but Angela was not her real name because of the circumstances of enslavement and her capturing and things like that. But I will also share my screen to show my post, and apologize for us going a little bit too fast. I'll try to take it a little bit slower. So I really wanted to focus on a big discussion that I talked about was the humanity of these individuals, especially those who are enslaved, and focusing on their contribution to individuals, but also their livelihood and their humanity and things like that. So I mentioned on this slide about how Angela got to come to the United States, or how Angela was captured and brought against her will to the United States. And Angela was actually one of the first individuals who was recorded, or one of the first Black individuals who was recorded as a part of the United States. So her significance is very high in Jamestown, and that's why I chose her, because she was one of the first, very relevant to our area and very relevant to the legacy of slavery in the nation. I also included a slide regarding some of the tasks that she did and her relationship with the family that owned her, or that was she was a part of, and talking about like some of the tasks that she was tasked with, and also talking about the legacy that she leaves today, and how I have at the bottom, her voice is written in the dirt and we are driven to find it. We want to give Angela a voice. Oftentimes Angela has been seen by some as kind of this figure of the history, embodying the history of Black Americans in the United States. So very important figure, not only to Jamestown, but to the entirety of the Black community. So that was Angela. So.
And then I can talk about my project. So I had the chance to work with Carlos, who couldn't be here, but we were assigned to learn a little bit more about free Black women. And so he worked on, his project was focused on Anna Marie Douglas, excuse me. But mine, I got the chance to research a woman named Harriet Purvis. She is from Philadelphia, and I can go ahead and share my screen. But Harriet Fortin Purvis was obviously significant for a number of reasons, but she did a lot of abolitionist work as well as suffragist work. And when we talk about intersectionality, she was a really good example of someone who fought to have a voice in a lot of spaces where she wasn't typically given one. In a lot of suffragist spaces or feminist spaces, those were mostly dominated by white women. So she faced a lot of opposition there. And in a lot of abolitionist spaces, those were largely dominated by men. So sort of two components of her identity made it a little bit more challenging to have a voice. So she started her own organization in Philadelphia, which was fantastic, with a group of other women. And I'll just sort of flip through some of these slides. Her organization was called the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was the first biracial women's abolitionist group, which is awesome. And then I also learned a lot about how she and her husband sort of were a team once they were married, and they had an Underground Railroad station. She worked to desegregate Philadelphia streetcars, among a lot of other things. So it was a real privilege to learn about her, and yeah, it really contributed a lot to my experience. So.
Thank you all for sharing your posts. So we've now gotten to see the finished product, right? But what kind of research did you do to create those campaigns, and what did you learn about the research process as you were doing it? I'm thinking it might be easier if I start, just at least picking someone to go first. So I don't want to put you on the spot. But Zoe, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So we were lucky enough that the awesome people at the Lemon Project put together some resources for us to start with. So it was a really awesome place to start. Personally, since I was looking at a primary source, actually that was mentioned in an awesome presentation that we got, I believe, from Dr. Jody Allen in the beginning of our trip, of the more educational portions. So I was looking a lot at the Bruton and Middlesex Parish registry and kind of using primary sources, which is really cool for me to do as a STEM major. I don't get to interact with a lot of primary sources, especially. It was cool to see the ones involved with William and Mary. And as I kind of mentioned in my previous, when I was talking about my post, using primary sources led me to look into secondary sources that kind of talked about more background into what exactly primary sources tell us about who's important, how the form of that source kind of shapes what we know. To kind of elaborate on that, like Molly was mentioned in a baptism record as a mother, and that kind of sheds a light on the unfortunate and like tragic space of enslaved women as being used for their bodies as opposed to addressing their humanity. So that was something that really came to light for me in the research process.
Does anyone else want to add anything? Maybe someone who was looking at more of the 1900s or civil rights or even contemporary women. What did your research look like if it wasn't primary source documents?
So for me, since I was part of the contemporary women group, it wasn't too difficult to find information. So a lot of the sources I used were secondary sources that I found online, and a lot of like universities have posted like biographies of Trudy or Harriet, so I was able to find some information there. And for me, it was also helpful to have like the special collections presentation where they showed us how to like look through like literal like digital like archives and stuff like that. So I was able to look through a yearbook and find that find the department that she worked in. So that was also helpful to put in my presentation. So I had more secondary sources, and I used a little bit of primary sources through learning about the special collections section. And like for research, I thought it was really essential to know that that you can get sources from a variety of places, and knowing that was very helpful for my presentation as well.
I was also in the contemporary women group, and so it was relatively easy to find information, but what I found really cool and helpful was looking directly at Alicia Garza's like Instagram and Twitter to get the information straight from her to see what she's been up to recently after the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that was really cool for me to get that more updated information.
Was there anything surprising that you guys found in your research? Anything that either didn't make it into your social media campaigns or just things that you came across that you didn't know and sort of took you back? And I'll call on someone. Caitlin, is there anything that you found surprising?
Yeah, so my research was a little different. Like I said, we used the Netflix show. And so I took it upon myself to watch that just for learning purposes. But it really kind of opened my eyes to see like how Hollywood has taken its own kind of run of the presenting women from this time period. And in particular, Ma Rainey's. I know I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a couple of criticisms that the movie doesn't really touch on her. It really touches on like more greater, like bigger picture type concepts. And so it's almost like those concepts overshadowed her. And so this kind of brings it, full circle where we had this intersectionality of Black women where they get forgotten. And this was a huge, Netflix show that had her name in the title, and she was almost nowhere to be found within it. And she was just kind of seen as like a very flat character. And so I found that really, really interesting to see that, here's Netflix trying to, spotlight a Black woman, but really just, shadowing her once again. And so I thought that was really interesting to see that, like this is happening right now. It's not going away. And it was really, really eye-opening and really sad at that point. I was like, you have this whole platform and, there are other ways that you can use it. And yeah, so that's what I found really interesting in that part.
Yeah, I was gonna I echo what Caitlin was saying, and also Zoe mentioned this a little bit earlier. I didn't really encounter any of these types of difficulties because Angela existed so long ago that and the materials just weren't necessarily kept at that point in time of her existence. So I didn't necessarily have an issue with the type of information. It was just kind of a lack of information. But I think one of the biggest things that we talked about throughout the week was just kind of not only in the research and works that we were finding, but also in just discussions of these Black women is the narratives and who kind of gives and directs those narratives, and thinking critically about them, like Zoe was saying. And I think the reason why a lot of us chose the women that we did was because we didn't know anything about them and they weren't necessarily the folks that had the spotlight on them. And Dr. Johnson actually gave us a really great presentation during the weekend regarding some queer Black activists that don't necessarily have a lot of spotlight or national attention in the way that a lot of other either Black straight female activists or Black male activists. Oh, my power's going out. Okay. That they do. So I think that was just something that we had to keep in mind throughout this entire process, is that even in the reading of these things, the material that we do find might not necessarily be written from the perspective of someone, like might be not be written from a Black perspective, might be written through a white gaze or something like that. So I thought that was important to bring out. So.
Yeah, I really want to echo that forgotten piece. I think that especially applies, and being pushed out piece as well. I think that especially applies to the person that I researched, which was Moray, her involvement was very focused on, like, she invented she founded the National Organization of Women. And I just thought that was so crazy to hear, because I have heard of that, but I only hear the name Betty Friedan. And of course, Betty Friedan's a white woman. Moray talked about how she quit the National Organization of Women because she saw it as no longer the NAACP for women, but rather the NAACP for privileged white women. So that's also the intersections of class. So I thought that was very interesting. But then she's also kicked out of like Black movements. She mentioned the March on Washington, where she was very frustrated that there were no women invited to give a speech or meet with the president. And she talked about the dual burden of Jim Crow and Jane Crow. And I just thought that quote just stuck out to me every single time I read something about her. I think it's a struggle that a lot of these women are dealing with. So it's just very just sad to see that they were kind of pushed out of their own movements. And also the fact that I've never heard of her before, when her impact is immense.
So a number of you have sort of touched on this, but why do you think that some of these individuals are so well known and others not as much, no matter the fact that they are so influential and have achieved so much? And especially since you all have been focusing on intersectionality, what do you think that tells us about history and these intersectional stories about specifically race and gender and Black women? And Maria, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think in a general sense, we talked a lot about how history is told and constructed by the people who are in power, and it's always been that way. And Black women having the dual burden of racism and sexism have not been in power in the same way that a lot of people telling history have been. So I think that certainly contributes to the fact that some of these individuals are not so well known, despite how much incredible work they've done. Honestly, that was something that I kind of was reconciling with, was the fact that there are just so many stories that we didn't even have a chance to explore. We worked really hard on exploring the women who we chose, but there were so many more listed that I'm still really curious about and would like to learn more about. But I think it just speaks to the way that we're taught history and the information that's shared with us, whether it's in a classroom or on the news, kind of engaging with that information and making sure that we're sort of always keeping in mind what we might not be being told. And also even like from a perspective of being in a classroom, wondering why we're being taught certain things and not other things, and how we can kind of move forward and work to change that and make sure that we are learning about a variety of people and learning history from a more progressive and perspective of justice, I would say.
Yeah, I think, sorry, my printer is making noises now. I think one of the things too, that it kind of stems off of that, what Marie was just saying, but we also talked about the perspectives that we bring in to looking at these stories, and the privileges that we have when approaching these things. And so like, as a white woman, like reading these stories, like someone in the comments just mentioned, like white women have a history of erasing the work of Black women as a part of the leadership of their groups and the important work that they have done. And so I think just recognizing that aspect of things too, and being reflective about our own place in telling these stories and reading them and trying to learn and reflecting on why some of these things were so surprising or new to us was also a really important part of the weekend and the work too. So.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add to that point? Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the people, the women that you did choose to highlight on these campaigns. Do you remember any of the women that you didn't choose, and how did you make that decision? And then how do we sort of rectify the fact that there are all these other women that didn't get a social media campaign highlight on the Lemon Project social media? And Toby, do you mind going first?
So you're asking like why we chose the person that we chose, and why is it that we didn't choose the other ones, and how do we rectify the people that we didn't choose? I guess like I chose Trudy Harris because I had no idea who like the first African-American tenured professor was, and I thought that was pretty interesting, and I thought it was essential for the William and Mary community to know. I didn't, now that I'm thinking about it, I really didn't like keep in mind that I was in a way kind of not acknowledging other histories by choosing one, but I guess the way that can be like rectified is just continuing to like uplift like different stories as much as we can. One way that has that I guess that I have been engaged in that is by being intentional through like the classes that I like choose to take at William & Mary, continuing to learn about the history of Black people in the diaspora and in the continent. So that's one way that I believe that that can be rectified, but I feel like there's still a lot of work that has to be done, in my opinion.
I think going off of Toby's point, I think what we really need to do is just stay curious. And so there's a lot of people, a lot of the people that we had, a lot of the women were interconnected in their own eras. So I know one of mine was Madam C.J. Walker and then her daughter. And so you could see like how the legacy progressed, but a lot of the times like you could make other connections. So like mine was in the like beauty industry. So like if I could continue learning about like how Black people have, you know, the history of Black people in the beauty industry, like how, when did this happen? When were they able to make the breakthrough with Madam C.J. Walker? But just continuing to learn and continuing to ask questions and taking the time to research, even just like a Wikipedia page, take it for a grain of salt, but even just a little thing here or there. Like for the movies, if you go and you see like a historical movie, maybe see like, okay, like, well, how were other people treated during this time period? And like I said, just, you know, staying curious and being open to seeing other people's opinions and perspectives, but always, you know, taking it with a grain of salt, knowing that there's more than one side to every story. And just taking that for what it is.
So I want to turn now to hearing about how you actually crafted these campaigns. So some of you did Twitter threads, some did Instagram posts or Instagram stories. How did you decide what format you wanted to tell these stories in? And how do you think that format sort of impacted how you told the story? Like, how did you choose? How did you think about getting people to meaningfully engage with these women that you had been researching? And Taylor, do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, I think something I really focused on in mine, I made Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook graphics and basically kept them the same throughout just because it was easy to use the same information. But when I was making the graphics, just making sure I included information that people would be interested in reading. Obviously, it's all very important about Alicia Garza, but making sure that I could break it down so that people could easily read it. Obviously, no one has time to read full articles about everyone they see and are interested about on social media. So I included like a quote that I thought people would help relate to Alicia Garza, and then also just further information if people wanted to see more about her. So like her book and her podcast. So just making sure people had the opportunity if they wanted to learn more, but understanding that not everyone has the time on the social media to read everything I would put there.
I can kind of echo what Taylor said, but I also did Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And I think what we showed all of you all was our Instagram posts, and in particular Instagram posts that kind of you can click through and each page has a little bit of information. Those have certainly gotten pretty popular, I would say, over the past year and a half. It's a really good way for people to kind of share information with one another that they think is interesting. So that was one of the key ways, but including images where we could, sort of trying to, like Taylor said, make the information palatable and easy to consume. But also I think on a separate point, I remember how in our reflections and in our discussions, we all recognize that like this is a privilege to be able to tell these stories. And we wanted to make sure that we were kind of doing justice to the stories of these women. And I know that I think all of us have even more information that just like couldn't fit in one post, but hopefully, you know, the goal was to at least get people to kind of check it out and learn something, and maybe they would remember the name or remember what they learned. But I do remember just that was kind of a common theme, was everyone was really trying to make sure that we did justice to these stories because they're so important, and it's a privilege to be able to tell them.
I think an interesting thought, just thinking about the form of the posts that we did, especially Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, something I was reflecting on and we reflect on at Branch Out is sustainability, as Meg and Taylor kind of touched on earlier, and sustainability in a way that our work is something that is lasting and continues to have a positive impact. And I really liked the idea that our posts, especially on Instagram, like you can scroll through and it's still there. So maybe someone in a month, in 6 months, will still hopefully see our post and maybe be inspired to do some research of their own.
So when these posts were put out into the world, they were really successful across all of the Lemon Project social media. Do you have any, as we sort of finish up talking about the social media campaigns, do you have any things that you want to share with our audience about strategies that you found successful, or ways that you think social media can be utilized to do this, to spread awareness and do this work? And Taylor, do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, so I guess not like the most important thing with social media, I think, is engagement. Like, I think that's what really made us successful. I know whenever, not like the Instagram stories are kind of they're filled with random activist things all the time, but I do think they are helpful, especially for spreading this message. Every single time I saw that one of our posts went up, I ran and put it on my story. Raven Stringfield came and talked to us about like doing that engagement and kind of stuff, and she was very helpful. So I think, yeah, just important to engage with content that you think is important, because it really does boost that algorithm. So
something else we focused on in our education before coming into the trip with the social media activism is understanding that like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter all have different users. And unfortunately, we didn't really have a ton of time over our trip weekend to kind of differentiate all the three and make different posts for all the different platforms. But something that I guess if I were to do it again and have more time, I would make sure to kind of tailor those to the different populations that do go on the different platforms.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things too is I think Taylor mentioned this a little bit, and including articles or further things to read in the post that we share, but it's no secret that a single Instagram post with fun graphics is going to like solve racism or like end sexism, or like, you know, for those who aren't on Instagram, there has been growth in popularity following the murder of George Floyd, like with "So You Want to Talk About," and it's like a specific social justice topic or pertinent current issue, and then you swipe through and it's kind of just like a snippet of the issue and the theory or anything behind it. And so I think one of the biggest things with those is it's important as an introduction, but not necessarily as a way to think that you know everything about what's going on, or that you can really internalize it and be more intentional about your day-to-day life. So I think a key aspect of that too was just kind of encouraging a call to action or like a reflection in each of the posts, or following each of the posts, because a post on social media is not enough. It's a great way to call attention to people, but I think in order for our posts to really be meaningful, that was a really important thing to include. So.
And following up on that, I know for my own purposes, I have like the attention span of, you know, a small child. And so kind of balancing the importance of telling the story and telling enough of the story to get that call of action that Meg was talking about, plus, you know, our attention span is like 0.0. And so just really balancing out, you know, where to bold things, where to add those, you know, graphics that Taylor was talking about, to really kind of grab the attention, but, you know, allow them to know that this is only like a sneak peek, and to have them further look through the articles and through the movies and through the videos, is really hard to do. And so I know all of us really struggled with that, as Maria was talking about earlier, just really figuring out what do we want to put first, like, what will allow them to swipe through to slide 4. So I think that was a really big part of our campaign, was just trying to figure out, like, how do we get them to look at the post and then interact with the post and then continue with the post.
So as you all have been talking about, the goal of these social media campaigns is to lead to action, right? What has the research that you've done, how has that influenced you all to take action? Has it affected like your relationships? Has it changed the way you've interacted with people? Has it like influenced your field of study in any way? What have you taken from the research that you've done? And what are you going to do to sort of implement action from that? And Meg, do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think prior to this project, I think, like I kind of mentioned, there was a big uptick in sharing of activist related or like racial justice, social justice type of content following the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Breonna Taylor, and you know, the numerous horrendous acts of police violence against Black people that occurred leading up to the summer of 2020. So I think I was already kind of engaging myself, and I had tried to prior to that point, but it wasn't necessarily as convenient in that everyone was posting about it on social media, or like there were consistent, easy things to swipe through. So I think that the project just kind of was a continuance of that kind of realization that these are topics that can be displayed across social media and can be conversed in these ways and I think too, in terms of affecting my relationships, I think that I consistently self-reflect on my place and my relationships with friends who are of a different race or different identity than me. And I think that doing this work just kind of reminded me how important it is to think back about narratives that are told and who's telling them, and kind of the theme that we've been talking about for so long, and be sure that I am, giving respect to these narratives, and also analyzing what microaggressions might have come out of the way that these tales have been told, and analyzing my interactions with other people through that lens. So I think that's how that kind of affected those relationships. And me being a sociology major, I definitely love storytelling and learning about people and all of that great qualitative stuff. So I think that this project was a great gateway into exploring that more and focusing on the intersectionality of so many issues. So.
Something I think that has really, or that was really highlighted for me over the weekend was, obviously I knew I knew that the Lemon Project existed, and I knew some of the work that was being done, but it was such a privilege to get to learn from people who are running the Lemon Project and doing this research every day and have been doing this work for a long time, like Dr. Allen and everyone who was involved. I think something specific to my experience as a William and Mary student is, I think, thinking about the Lemon Project and some of the women we learned about is really, really important for understanding that on our campus, there are a lot of stories that we don't know, and also understanding that the spaces that we have class in, that we eat in, that we walk along all the time, a lot of really horrible injustices took place here, and understanding that, you know, a lot of the spaces where we interact were in fact created because of labor from people who were enslaved by the college. And that's something that I think I definitely have tried to really consider when I'm on campus or doing anything on campus, really. I think it's important to remember all of the stories that came before now and how that influences what we're doing. So that was definitely a really important thing that stood out to me from the weekend, and something that I've certainly been keeping in mind.
Sort of to echo that. So I'm a STEM major, so I kind of looked at the medical part, but just realizing that a lot of doctors had problems diagnosing like African Americans with certain diseases based on their skin tone, because they didn't show up the same as they did on white people. And knowing that there was like the first, you know, African American textbook kind of like published very recently was really something that I didn't quite understand, like the whole concept behind it, and didn't realize that that was such a big step forward, and that we had such a like a white prioritization rather than, you know, all people, because African Americans did not just pop up like 10 seconds ago. They've been they've been here for a long time, and just to see that this is really, it's a very now problem, and that was obviously heightened by the Black Lives Matter movement, and so just knowing that this is a really issue that's like very now. It's not, you know, in the past, it's not 50 years ago. And still, you know, there are still implicit biases. There's still, you know, biases that nobody knows about, or that they're unconscious, and that we still have a lot to learn and a lot to improve. Really just kind of stuck out with this weekend. I learned a little bit more about how to rise above those and to look at the different perspectives and different stories, and use that information to continue to learn about things and, you know, improve my own ideas and knowledge on it.
So I just wanted to say that because this was a project where we had to like seek our own resources and do our own research, I feel like it really like prompted me to do my own research as well, and to like kind of like seek like narratives on my own rather than just like consuming like information from social media, because I feel like there's a tendency to kind of just like repost things that we see and not really like look at where these sources are coming from. And then I think it really encourages like our own like personal thought, and encourages us to be like more genuine and like kind of like purposeful in like what we're doing and what we're seeking out. And I think in terms of relationships, it really prompted me to engage in more conversations, especially with my family members, because this is like information that we never really like talked about before. So like as we're like growing older and like everything's happening in the world, I just feel like this project has really prompted me to kind of like find a way to like seek out this information on my own and talk to others about what I'm finding.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. I feel like coming out of this whole experience, I was like, I need to do my own research and research that will never stop. It will continue for the rest of my life, most likely. I've started reading a lot more like books that have been written by Black women. I feel like I've learned exponentially more, and I have so much more to learn. But I've also reflected a lot about the limitations of like the American public school system, and how I loved my history classes in school, but how white they were and how male they were, and how heteronormative they were. So I think that's something that in the future I definitely want to advocate for, because these stories are not just Black history, not just queer history, not just women's history, but they're American history. And I think leaving these stories out is not telling the whole story.
So I have a question from an audience member that I want to ask you all. And it says, the panelists have mentioned many problematic issues with history being written by those in power, usually through a white gaze, and of white women historically erasing their African American counterparts. What did you learn about these issues that you were able to apply to your own storytelling as you created your campaigns? Did you have any concerns about telling stories that are not your own? And did you do anything differently that you might have before participating in this project? So a lot of different questions there. But I think if we want to focus especially on those participants who are not Black women, how did you feel writing stories, researching about these women, and telling their stories even though they weren't necessarily yours? And Zoe, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I think the first thing that comes to mind was definitely coming to everything from a place of humility and openness to having the kind of dominant narratives that you grow up with really be challenged, and listening to all of the wonderful people at the Lemon Project who gave us their presentations, really taking time to do research, critically thinking about where you're getting information. I'm so sorry. What was the last part of the question? I'm so sorry, I blanked.
So there were a few different ones. You can feel free to answer or touch on as many as you can, or just one. So what did you learn about these issues that you were able to apply to your own storytelling as you created the campaigns? Did you have any concerns about telling stories that are not your own? And sort of following up on the previous question, did you do anything differently after the project that you wouldn't have done before in terms of your actions or behavior or thoughts?
I think going back to the first couple of questions you asked, I really tried in my post to include quotes from, I couldn't include quotes from Molly just because given the story that I was telling, but from authors of like the Lemon Project report, and not using my own voice, but using the voice of the people who were participating in this research. And that was something I really thought about being intentional with, not taking this time to make it about me and this is what I'm doing, but these are the stories that I'm telling, and kind of using my privilege like that.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that in terms of your self-reflection or your thinking about your role in storytelling?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I thought about going into this is just how much of an obligation that we have to tell these stories, especially going back to whiteness being the center or of history, and man constructed history, rather, and erasing the other parts of history. So I felt going in with like that kind of perspective, and that and also being open, like Zoe said, to having your narratives challenged, but also to having your own perspectives or ways that you went about talking about something challenged or corrected, because it's as a white woman, it's not something that you can necessarily understand completely, but rather something that you need to empathize with and educate yourself on, and listen to those who have these lived experiences. So I think just going in with that mindset was helpful, and centering the voices and the narratives of, in direct quotes, rather than speaking over them, was really important to me. So.
All right, so I have one last question for everyone. I want to be mindful of time. Audience members, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. This will be the last one, as long as no one else has anything else to add. But I guess perhaps on a little bit lighter of a note, or more reflective note, I'd love for each of you to go around and say what your favorite or most meaningful part of the weekend was and why. And Taylor, if you want to start us off, and then we can do what we did with the introductions and call on someone else after you, please.
So mine is definitely on a lighter note, but one of my favorite parts was, I believe it was Saturday night after our day of service. We did a little bit of a game night with everyone over Zoom. And to me, that just showed that even though the trip was on a virtual format, we could still bond and connect like as if we were in person. And definitely just having the long winter break, it was nice to again connect with peers and be able to just have a good time and talk about random life events, which I thought was really fun for our trip. So I'll popcorn to Maria.
Haley, I was gonna say the game night. No, there were so many really incredible moments during the weekend. I'm sort of trying to regroup because it's hard to pick one. I think that honestly, just kind of hearing from Dr. Allen, Dr. Johnson, hearing from all of our speakers, I know that's really broad, but I just found it to be such a privilege, and we reflected on that a number of times. But I was just like really, I didn't know what to expect, but the fact that we got to work so closely with these incredible people and scholars was really cool. But also the game night was really fun, and our moments of levity in all of it were fun too. So I will popcorn Caitlin.
Yeah, so I also want to echo what Maria said. I really liked the presentations that we had. I definitely think that there are so many like different intersectionalities that I just didn't really think of, like Dr. Johnson's presentation about queer Black women, which is a whole nother intersectionality there, which is really interesting to see that, you know, there's more than one type of person. That kind of goes back to like, you know, erasing history and the whole 9 yards. And so I really enjoyed kind of learning about a whole nother section of people that I just didn't really know about. And then I really enjoyed talking with my partner Ria during our little campaign sessions, brainstorming, figuring out like, does this look good? Like, what blue should I use? Things like that. Was really kind of like a good break in between learning about, you know, all of the Black women of our eras. And I will popcorn to Taylor.
My favorite part, you kind of stole mine, Caitlin, but I loved Dr. Johnson's lecture about Black lesbians. That was very interesting. But I also loved doing research and hearing about everyone else's research. Just everyone else being so excited and passionate about the women that they chose was a lot of fun to talk about. And I'll popcorn to Toby.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, it was really fun, you know, getting to hear what everybody was researching. And I think a huge highlight for just the weekend in general was like there was a time while we were doing research that it seemed that like we were kind of like getting a little stressed. Well, at least I was. And I just remember Dr. Allen and Dr. Thomas just like telling us, you know, that, you know, like we're just like learning here, and this is like a learning experience. So, you know, like this is just, you know, a time for us to like amplify voices, and, you know, we don't have to like make everything perfect, but just, you know, just engage and make sure that we're engaging others as well. So that was a big part for me, and it made me feel like really comfortable. Yeah, so that was something that was a big highlight for my weekend. I think, I don't know if everyone went, but Meg, I don't know if you went yet.
Yeah, I can share. I think I really loved all of the parts that everyone mentioned and learning about everything, but I think the biggest thing was just to see the excitement among all of the participants as the week went on, and you could kind of see how some of the things that we had been learning over the weekend start to really apply and how people were approaching everything. So I just really appreciated seeing the growth and intentionality and excitement and thoughtfulness that everyone was really putting into the work, because I think that that was the whole point of everything, you know, was to be, like Toby said, amplifying voices and making sure that something is heard. So I just appreciated seeing that part of the weekend. So, and I'll popcorn to Zoe.
Thank you, Meg. My favorite part, kind of continuing what everybody said, because it was just a really fun weekend. I think definitely I felt incredibly grateful throughout the entire weekend for all of the work that everyone at the Lemon Project does, and that they took their time to share it with us. It was incredibly meaningful to learn about something so important to this history of the school. And I also really valued the chance to get to have a conversation with my peers about issues like this, because I think we're really lucky at William & Mary, and we have a lot of really passionate students. And I really valued the chance to come in and just kind of be a humble sponge and listen to everybody's ideas and maybe get the chance to bounce off my own.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your insights and talking to all of us. I really appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot. And I also want to thank everyone for attending today, and remind you all before we conclude that we have our next keynote tonight by Dr. Catherine Meeks at 6:30. So go get dinner, take a little Zoom break, and then come right back for what I'm sure will be a great talk. So again, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your Friday. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.